Thank you, Jeff. Well, it's a pleasure to be here up on this dais and to lecture on a theme that has sort of waffled around in my mind. I first got the invitation from someone in our system that I was to give a lecture on beautiful marriage. In terms of the theme of our symposium, that God, in His wisdom, touches every square inch of our existence. Marriage is fundamental to who we are. Those of you who aren't married, I would encourage you to get married, or at least have friends who are married and spend quite a lot of time with them. That will help you a lot. But you know, I've always thought that marriage was a strong thing in the United States. Not like in Europe where people were, sort of trying to attempt all kinds of methods. However, apparently in the last few years, marriage has fallen in America. In the last 2 decades, some 500,000 births per year are no longer happening. There is a delay in marriage, a delay in childbearing, and in home ownership, as young people are deciding not to get married. I don't know how much the Obergefell versus Hudgens Supreme Court justice decision to legalize gay marriage has influenced what's going on in our culture. But it's surely part of what our young people now say, that normal marriage isn't necessarily legal. There are all kinds of marriage. The Supreme Court added the LGBTQ ideology to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which makes homosexual orientation a right in our culture. And it's caused a rise in the number of people who call themselves gay. In 2004, 30% of Gen Zers believe that they are LGBTQ. This has risen from 3.4 people who thought that they were gay. So is this a physical thing or a spiritual thing? I would say it's a spiritual thing. And that's what we're facing today. And so we're facing a downturn in the number of births. It's called the fertility rate, which is now 1.6 fertility rate with couples. Whereas to reproduce our culture, we need 2.1%. So we're slowly eliminating our culture. The American nuclear family is officially dead. In 1970, nearly 70% of American adults ages 25 to 49 were living with a spouse. As of 2021, the most recent year for which they have data, that has fallen from 70% to 37%, those living with a spouse. I hope I've convinced you that marriage is on the way down in our culture. And I think this is a place where we can discover how we can be a practical witness in our culture as we affirm as Christians the beauty of marriage. Because young women are leaving the church in unprecedented numbers because they have competing priorities, they're involved in business, and many of them are rejecting God. But also there is a subtle emphasis, and I don't know how much you see this, a subtle emphasis of what you might call Neo-Marxism. That's a view of the culture that gets rid of God and all the structures that God placed in the culture. Neo-Marxism ties the postmodern rejection of objective truth into the political program of radical egalitarianism. I heard when I was a student the famous 60s radical chant, "Hey ho, what do you know, Western Civ has got to go." Young people, you probably don't hear that anymore because it's actually happened. Because queer theorists, like the postmodernist brethren, deny the existence of any category or pattern in nature. Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, believes that he was also involved as well in thinking through postmodernism, believes that social practices were transitory because he didn't believe in God, and that mental illnesses are the result of alienation caused by capitalism. And he saw this view of existence as affirming false pairs of opposites, namely man and woman, homo, hetero, creator, creature. That's an amazing statement, isn't it? That these distinctions are false. We have a challenge to us as Christians in this 21st century to affirm the beauty of heterosexual marriage. But of course, to undermine what has been built in our culture is what Marxists want to do. They have to deny the significance of marriage. This began in the 30s through the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School with its attack on the family. Neo-Marxism, actually, I should take the time to describe this, is not the old-fashioned Karl Marx Marxism of calling on the working class to rise up and destroy the upper classes, actually kill them. And that happened in many places. Neo-Marxism follows the thought of an Italian Marxist by the name of Gramsci, who said that the way of making Marxism succeed is by destroying the culture and the things that define what the culture means. You've probably seen on television Pete Buttigieg, who is the transport secretary. I just recently read that he was proposed as a red diaper baby. You may never have heard that term, the red diaper baby, but it means he was born into a communist family, and his father is the American expert in the thinking of Gramsci, the Italian Marxist who was telling Marxists how to really take over the culture by destroying the structures of the culture. when you can follow this through, you realize that they are involved in destroying binary distinctions. The binary notion of the family must be eliminated. And if you do research, you can actually find neo-Marxist feminists. Sophie Lewis writes, "We deserve better than the family. The nuclear family is training us to be inhabitants of a binary gendered and racially stratified system, training us not to be queer." This is an amazing ideology in our world today. This agenda deconstructs even the use of terms like father and mother. And even someone like Nancy Pelosi called upon the House of Representatives to no longer use the term father and mother. Another Marxist feminist, Rosemary Ho, takes up the theme and wants to dismantle capitalism by abolishing the family. The most radical Marxist feminist, M.E. O'Brien, wants to develop organized communes that can come about only by a generalized insurrection. Jeff was mentioning to you, doubtless my original lectures focused on Romans 1:25, where the Apostle Paul says, "They exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator." Either a onist, non-binary way of looking at life or a twoist, binary way of looking at life. Now, why is twoism so important? Well, if you add up creator and creature, you've got two kinds of existence, right? That is essential to the way we think about ourselves. So I call that twoism. Whereas if the creature worships himself, which is what paganism does, then of course we only have one. And then we have non-binary oneism. So this ideology, it's very interesting, has taken over our modern world. You know, people talk about being non-binary sexual beings. This has become very common in our life. But you see, you can get to the gospel by taking people to what they don't know what they're saying when they say that they are non-binary. And I believe that this is one of the best ways of doing evangelism in the 21st century. Actually, it takes people by surprise. They are not expecting you to attack the basis of the understanding of the world this way. And that's why, of course, the biblical view of sexuality as male and female is so appropriate in our time. Even though, as Mary will show us, there's an attempt to eliminate male and female sexuality, this is the essence of who we are. And as we can take that notion, which is so true, so beautiful, and present it to people, we can get them to think in terms of a binary way of thinking about themselves, thus about God. So this is the real problem of the family. And the non-binary way of thinking can also be described, can also be described as an androgynous way of thinking about sexuality. What is androgyny? It's aner and, what's the female? Gune. Androgynous. means the joining of male and female together. That is non-binary. So people today are trying to identify sexuality in its normal way of expression as androgyny. We are both male and female. Can you see that is so opposing to the biblical view? So we have an opposing, but that makes sense, an opposing view of existence, both about God and the creature, and in sexuality as well. So we have every square inch being touched by the Christian gospel. But this idea of the non-binary has caught, for many people, as a way of thinking. Carl Jung said, "We must beware of thinking of God and evil as absolute opposites." That's interesting. He was rejecting what we call the conjunctio oppositorum, the difference of opposites. And a woman was writing about the culture, and she was describing a new view of sexuality as androgynous sexuality. So she was a New Age theorist that then turned herself to what she could say about sexuality, and it was androgyny that told her what to do. Now, why are we into this kind of thinking? It seems rather odd. And yet, and this is what I was thinking when I first came over to America in the 60s, and I noticed things were happening in American culture. And what was happening was we were being attracted by Eastern thinking about the way things are in a Buddhist or a Hindu manner. And Philip Goldberg, in his book American Veda, that actually was published in 2010, said that the fundamental notion that we must all understand, and Christians too must affirm it, is the Hindu notion of Advaita. You will be surprised to know that Advaita, A-D-V-A-I-T-A, means not two. Is there anything new under the sun? This is the Hindu way of looking at existence. As I said, it's a pagan way of viewing life. So Advaita is what has taken over, which means we get rid of distinctions. And it can drive us nuts. There's a book by Christine Chandler called Enthralled, the Guru Cult of Tibetan Buddhism. And she meditated on this oneism way of thinking hours a day for 30 years. At the end, she left the cult. She said, "I was losing my mind." People get into meditation of using oneism and they lose their mind. But it's unfortunately the classic way of pagan thinking. The onist gurus of Gnosticism and Hinduism call their followers to flee the mind. The ideas that get you to not think in a distinct way are called koans. The sound of one hand clapping, for instance. And we live in a time where we're told to stop making distinctions. And our children are being attacked by this too. A wonderful expression of androgyny is the drag queen story hour. Can you ever imagine a more obvious androgynous expression than a man dressed up as a woman teaching children? And yet I saw this used by the Vatican, using drag queens at some point. It's interesting that these men dressed as women are suffering from, get this, autogynephilia. Autogynephilia. That means thinking that you are a woman and liking it. But it's a narcissistic problem. It's hardly a way of building a culture. And yet we have seen this happening in different ways. Madame Simone de Beauvoir in 1959 was the, if you like, the first feminist who famously said, "On ne naît pas une femme, on le devient." You probably didn't get that. One is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. So already from 1959 onwards, Mary, feminists have been saying this. And we are told that body parts can be removed, reconfigured at will, and that a woman is called a birthing parent or a chest feeder. So we're deliberately trying to undermine male-female distinctions. And I'm here to tell you that that's beautiful. Unfortunately, President Biden's first day in office, he had those kinds of people at the White House. A gender man with long blonde hair, Rachel Levine, father of 3 children, calls herself now a woman. And she is described as the first woman assistant secretary of the Navy. So here you have somebody who's leading in office, being held up as an example, and she gets to decide what is to be done with children who are gender disturbed. A man who is gender disturbed is made head of the Secretary of the Department of Health. I believe that God speaks to us in all ways now because of the way He created the world. The Gospel of John begins, "In the beginning was the Word," Logos. That is the affirmation at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus that everything is logical. Everything is distinguished. The Word is at the beginning. The universe is a rational place. And indeed, every rational statement by atheists gets them into a problem because they're making rational statements that come from where? Well, because of the nature of the world. I heard Richard Dawkins, one of the best-known atheists, say a few weeks ago that he's glad to finally realize that the culture comes from an intelligent being. That's quite a statement. But he realizes to what extent distinction is essential. But you see, this has come into our campuses in very obvious ways where they don't necessarily say it. For instance, you will find in certain colleges that they will cancel people they don't like to hear. In other words, they're rejecting the one or twoist kind of debate, and they just want to think the way they think. I would suggest to you that we are coming now to a re-expression of Roman culture. Marriage in Rome was not beautiful. At the time of the Apostle Paul, Nero was marrying two men, Pythagoras and Sporus, one as his husband and one as his wife. Talk about transgender marriage. This was happening in the 1st century AD. Pythagoras was a handsome former slave freed by Nero, who then forced him into marriage in a public ceremony. Sporus was a young, beautiful eunuch whom the emperor married according to the witness of Suetonius, a historian. He had the boy castrated and performed on him sexual actions. 5 more minutes? I'm miles away from finishing. So what do we do? Is God placing things in their rightful places. And when God created, He created things in their rightful places and made a holy nation, a holy cosmos. The principle of holiness is the principle of distinction operative from the beginning in Genesis 1. Distinction is operating from the beginning. And God turns unformed matter into an ordered, beautifully functioning cosmos. So the key to the cosmos is not sameness or oneism, but difference, twoism. And marriage comes from a God who is different than us. That's a wonderful notion, actually. I hope you get a hold of that as you speak to non-Christian friends. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth. Splendor and majesty are before Him. Strength and beauty are in His sanctuary. 2 days ago, I read in Ecclesiasticus 3:11, God has made everything beautiful in its time. We have a beautiful God who is creating beautiful distinctions that we can know and use ourselves. I am happy to affirm that marriage is a beautiful thing. I have my wife here, and we've been married 53 years. Stand up, hon. I don't know why she wasted her time on me, but I find it a beautiful thing. And God has made everything beautiful in His time. So I would like to simply, as I come to the end, encourage you that God created the world as expressing distinction, not sameness. Male and female is a final and fundamental expression of difference and beauty. We read in Ephesians 5:31, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold to his wife, and they will become one flesh. This oneness is based on, and you must get this, This oneness is based on our being created in God's image. And this oneness is not exactly just the same. It's not the same. It's actually a celebration of distinction, because the Trinity is a celebration of distinction. The persons of the Trinity are one and distinct. We are made in God's image as male and female, one and distinct. That's the reason why we must oppose gay marriage, because gay marriage can never express the beauty of God. And I would suggest to you, as you think about that in the days ahead, that this is the way we must oppose the whole LGBTQ theology. We don't know how to do this because it says it's claiming for human beings their human rights. But if we are made in God's image, it's not expressing the image of God. And that's what we absolutely have to do. So I end with that, this beautiful, holy cosmos based upon a beautiful, holy marriage. And that's God's will for us, and we praise Him for it. Thank you.